felony. So that is very good advice.
Okay, it says if you are undocumented, you have the right to remain silent. You do not have to discuss your immigration or citizenship status with police, immigration agents, or other officials. Anything you tell an officer can be used against you in immigration court. You mentioned that. If an officer knocks on your door, and again, this is from the National Immigrant Justice Center. If an officer knocks on your door, do not open the door. Teach your children not to open the door. Officers must have a warrant signed by a judge to enter your home. ICE warrants are not signed by, if they are not signed by judges, or there are ICE forms signed by ICE officers, they do not grant authority to enter a home without consent of the occupants. All true?
Everything you just said is true. And so when, regardless of whether or not you have status in the country, you still have the same constitutional rights of any U.S. citizen, and that is, and one of those rights is to be secure in your place, your house, for instance. So, what they were just talking about is that don't open the door for law enforcement, and you know what? That's certainly advice. But what you want to do, and which is what they said, is make sure that they have a judicial warrant before you decide to do anything. And once you ask them for that, they have to provide it for you.
Yeah, they can slide it under the door. There are ways to do it that are non-intrusive.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm very curious about a couple of things. I want to take a macro view here for a minute. Data shows basically where we are right now. Border crossings have plummeted. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE arrests have doubled, and the number of people detained is at an all-time high. What's interesting is the expulsions are mainly Central America, people from Central America, Mexico, Haiti, and South America. I found this interesting. 29% have criminal convictions, 25% pending criminal charges that are out there, 47% though listed as other immigration violators. What does that mean?
Well, it's a generic term that it could mean a variety of things. It could mean that they have a prior illegal entry into the country. It also could mean that they have a different immigration-related crime. It could be passport fraud. It could be some type of document fraud.
Social Security fraud, that they've got a dummy Social Security number?
Exactly.
Okay.
If they're an imposter taking over somebody else's identity, exactly.
Okay. And finally, 12% are listed as fast-tracked for deportation. Who would those people be?
Those listed as fast-track for deportation would be those who have no prior illegal entries into the United States. So, typically the U.S. Attorney's Office will not prosecute you unless you have at least one prior illegal entry into the United States.
Removals by criminality. This is coming, by the way, from the ICE website. Removals by criminality. The top 3 cities: Harlingen, Texas, El Paso, Texas, and Phoenix, Arizona. What do you think most of those crimes deal with?
Well, I think that a lot of them have to do with prior illegal entries into the United States.
Okay.
However, in the past 5 to 6 years, we've seen a significant increase in individuals coming across here illegally with drug-related offenses, whether it's possession or drug trafficking.
What about human smuggling?
Oh, absolutely.
That's part of it.
USC 1324.
When we see these scenes out of LA, when it gets really scrappy, that strikes me that that's mostly outside agitators. Am I misreading that, or that's not the people actually being detained generally?
Exactly. They're there for a political purpose. Those that are here without status, they don't want to be seen, and they don't want to cause a ruckus because that just brings unwanted attention onto themselves. They want to just get on with their lives and, hopefully be able to make some money to send home. The last thing they want is for people like regular U.S. citizens to be mad at illegal aliens because they're rioting or committing all these crimes or protesting. That just doesn't make sense, with common sense, that these people would actually be doing that. I have met through, defendants and my clients, many people in this situation, and none of them have empathy for the agitators that are doing this because it just brings unwanted attention to them.
Final thing, how much are you dealing with? Because you represent people who get caught up in this, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so tell me about when ICE moves in, supposedly to arrest the worst of the worst. That's kind of what we were presented from President Trump. But they are sweeping up people who are here illegally but are not committing crimes other than the crime of entering the country illegally. How are we kind of balancing these things? Because public opinion on the criminality part, it's very strong. Remove those people. We don't want them here. But on the part of people who are here illegally but doing the right thing, so to speak, people have a completely different view of that.
Sure. So that would be a policy decision about how to enforce already existing laws. So, President Trump and his predecessors, they had policies about how they were going to enforce 8 U.S.C. 1325, which is illegal entry into the United States. Now, President Trump isn't the first one to invoke that statute aggressively. President Obama was termed, the deporter in chief. And President Trump has a very aggressive stance on this. And for him and his base, they feel like there's a zero-sum game. It's black and white. If you're here illegally, you need to be prosecuted and removed. Now, the policy is a completely different story, and that is whether or not it's the right thing to do. And, that's for elections. That's for the people voting for their politicians to decide.
Are you dealing with people, though, swept up in an ICE raid where they think they're going after criminals, but during the course of that, they find somebody here illegally or somebody who's overstayed a visa, and they're going to be subject to removal too, right?
I've heard horror stories where, there's an 800 number where you can call and turn in your neighbor, and that happened to one of my clients, and, her neighbor didn't like her, and she was driving to work, and ICE got behind her, and she pulled over, and they didn't even allow her to exit her vehicle. They walked up to the driver's side door, broke open the window, and dragged her out onto the street and arrested her because they said that she had a prior removal, and thus, she could be charged with a felony. So it is, very scary for anybody living in this country without status.
And Josh, isn't that the point of the administration? They're trying to make it inhospitable so that people self-deport, or it certainly repels people from wanting to come here illegally.
Yes, there is a deterrent effect.
Is that effective?
Absolutely it is. We have the lowest amount, when I say we, the United States has the lowest amount of border crossings, illegal border crossings, in the last 20 or 30 years. It is dried up to just a trickle. And that's because, the cartels are no longer advertising on the radio stations in Guatemala saying, give us your money and we'll get you into the United States, which is what they were doing prior to Trump being elected.
Incredibly interesting. We got to have you back. Josh Kolsrud, criminal defense attorney, former federal prosecutor. He knows this issue from both sides. I learned a lot. Thank you very much, Josh. It was very, very interesting.